Everybody, welcome to this Arizona Capital Times morning scoop. Protect your vote, learn, engage, and act. Steve Goldstein, we have a very esteemed panel with us. Tom Collins, Citizens Clean Elections Commission Executive Director. Gina Roberts, Citizens Clean Elections Commission Voter Education Director. Christina Estes-Werther, Citizens Clean Elections Commissioner, and Arizona's former Attorney General. Terry Goddard, first of all, welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for spending part of your Monday morning with us. Good to have you with us. For those of you who are viewing us right now, we will have some time for Q&A. So if there's some specific questions that you feel like we haven't gotten to or a missed follow-up question, please go to the Q&A function or the chat function. They will get to us somehow, and we will ask those as quickly as we can and put them in as relevant a position as we can to make sure we get the answer and the flow of the conversation continues. And again, we will remind you of that a few times during the course of this 1 hour conversation with the panel. Let's start off. Gina, I'm going to go to you first. For those people who are watching right now, I'm sure they know what the Clean Elections Commission is, but we talk about the role that Clean Elections plays overall in Arizona's election system, including voter education, which you're obviously a specialist at.
Sure. Hi, good morning, and good morning to everybody who chose to spend their Monday morning with us. We appreciate your time, especially as we are nearing our general election. So Clean Elections is the state's voter education agency, and I should state that it's the nonpartisan voter education agency. We've been around since 1998, since voters actually approved the Clean Elections Act through a citizens initiative. But I think what's really important is while we'll talk about multiple components of the act throughout this conversation, voter education is always at the undertone of that. So whether we're talking about campaign finance disclosure or the public financing option, you'll see the true goal that comes from this is voter education and transparency to the public. So ultimately what the commission does is we have a 5-member commission, and we're grateful that one of our commissioners is here today, Christina Werther. And the 5-member commission ultimately administers the Clean Elections Act, which, as I mentioned, has multiple components. And of that, you'll see voter education, and then you'll see a public financing option for statewide and legislative candidates. And then with that comes campaign finance enforcement. So again, we'll talk about those components, but I think as voters have come to know about clean elections, we really are known for that voter education component, whether it's our debates or our voter education guide that goes through every household with a registered voter. Voters have come to learn and expect accurate and official election information to help them participate in the political process. And that really goes back to our preamble, Steve. It goes back to the goal of the Clean Elections Act is to promote that participation in the political process. And so through those 3 components, we think that is how we achieve that process. But again, voter education is really, it's a critical component to get any voter the opportunity to cast their ballot. Election cycles, there's concerns about election integrity, mis, dis, and malinformation, or just not being informed enough about all of the choices on your ballot. And that's where you'll see Clean Elections come in, because we have everything from the logistics of getting your ballot to casting your vote, but also to learning about the candidates and the issues on the ballot, but also learning how your vote is safe, which is part of our discussion today. So I think that's probably a high-level overview of what Clean Elections is.
Thanks, Gina. We will get to a lot of those in the course of this conversation. And Tom, in a moment, I'm going to have you talk a little bit more about some of the measures, the ballot measures. But one ballot measure we definitely want to talk about with Terry Goddard is the voters' right to know measure, Terry, that after a lot of effort on your part and a lot of volunteers was finally approved by voters in the last election cycle. I want to talk about that before we bridge to a little bit more about clean elections, to the importance of having the voters' right to know measure involved in this particular election cycle, how that could affect voters, how that could affect, again, voter education, what they know about what's going on.
Well, I guess you could say that the voters' right to know measure, the anti-dark money program that we sponsored and that now is the law, is about the same thing as the Clean Elections Commission. It's about transparency. It's about trying to make sure that we know who is trying to influence our vote and we know how the process works. So that's something that we worked on very hard, and I hope is now, well, it's now the law of the land ever since 1922. Sorry, 2022.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Tom, let me go to you on that as far as the relationship that will exist, so people understand that as far as voters' right to know and where clean elections comes in as far as the dichotomy there.
Sure. So when the voters passed the Voters' Right to Know Act, they designated the Clean Elections Commission to be the primary administrative agency responsible for enforcing the act. And as Attorney General Goddard said, that does fit within our approach to things. Over the course of the past, certainly the past 14 years, the commission has, through the leadership of our commissioners, made decisions around how to better focus the commission's agenda on that preamble that Gina mentioned. For folks who are listening in, who go way back with clean elections and know about its history and the history of the public financing program in particular, there was a time when the mission, so to speak, of clean elections sometimes seemed to be its role in the distribution of public funds and the controversy around that. But in reality, that's not what the voters were talking about in the act. They were talking about public financing as a means to bring more transparency to the political process and make the process more issue focused, right? But that's not necessarily about candidates and distributing money. It's really about voters, right? So whether it's the report that Voters' Right to Know Act generates that allows voters to know, because one of the kind of myths of campaign finance is that it's secret who the money is. It's a secret from you and me. It's not a secret from the folks who are spending the money and distributing the money. So the point there is to say, hey, if you're out there spending money to buy for somebody's vote, the voter ought to know who that is. Likewise, on the public financing, role, there's an interaction with voters there, and additionally, where the money is. And then on the broader voter education agenda that Gina has demonstrated so much leadership over the last 10 years, it's to bring voters in contact with candidates through our debate program, our voter education guide, and other programs. So really what the commission has done over the course of the past, really the past 10 years is take a look at what the law provides as our mission, and really take a much more holistic approach that says that voters are at the center of that, not some individual candidate or who's up and who's down.
Before we dig into more of that, Christina, I want to introduce you to the conversation. Obviously, you're a clean elections commissioner. Can you explain to people viewing right now? I'd like to know why you wanted to do it. And secondly, what does it entail? What are some of the responsibilities?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. And thanks, Steve, for the question. So actually why I wanted to do it, I hadn't even really, I've been in this industry or this field for a while with elections, mostly at the local level, and have gotten quite knowledgeable about campaign finance. So when I was invited to apply, I actually was like, oh, sure, I actually think this might be a good fit and I'd really enjoy it. Sort of, I guess, a fun fact is, so the Clean Elections Act was passed about a month before I got married. So I always kind of vividly remember that election cycle. And I always know how old it is because that's how my anniversary is. So I never really actually thought at that time, I was a social worker, that, I'd ever be able to serve on the commission. But it's been really a privilege and very humbling. And the commissioners have just been so welcoming, as well as the staff. And I would say sort of the role of the commissioner obviously is, that's obviously the governing body for the commission itself and enforcing the act. And I always look, again, as a lawyer, right, to the originating documents, right? So the act itself. And I really felt like it was a good fit for me, as well as I can see from the other commissioners that it's really about having that sort of independent analysis, right? Being objective about the matters that are coming forward to the commission, which both Tom and Gina have touched on, right? Whether it's the public financing piece for those participating candidates, or the campaign enforcement aspect, or maybe now obviously it's the Voters' Right to Know Act, right? Which is kind of going through the rulemaking process. And I've only been on about 3 or 4 meetings so far since I was recently appointed, but we've been pretty active with the advisory opinions for the Voters' Right to Know Act. And so it's essentially really important matters that I think are coming before the commission that really have a ripple effect through the state, as we're really trying to provide that, that source, right? Give public confidence and integrity in the electoral system.
Before we move on, anyone want to follow up on that?
Well, I just want to say, Commissioner Werther is, in addition to an active and very important attorney in local election matters and campaign finance matters, is also the former state election director, former deputy general counsel to a governor. So truly a eminently qualified commissioner that, and obviously also my boss, but nevertheless, we are absolutely thrilled that Governor Hobbs chose to appoint her. Really brings a lot to these very important questions that have been posed to us through our new rule.
And let's remind people watching,
Hey,
this
jump
is
in
the,
just a second.
yes, Terry, go ahead. Yeah.
It seems to me that, and everything that's been said sort of circles around this central idea that our election integrity is critically important. It's been questioned in elections recently here in Arizona and across the country. And I just think Citizens Clean Elections, it's one of the great names that any organization can have. I think it's hard to say that we're not against citizens having clean elections. So they start off on a very plateau, and they've maintained that since 1998. A way that Arizona citizens can have much more confidence that our elections are being run transparently and honestly. And it's just it's a huge role that the group of citizens plays. And I think it's critically important to the effort I'm most concerned about, which is making sure that we don't have dark money in Arizona. And they've played a stand-up role already in that. If there hadn't been a Citizen Clean Elections Commission, when we did the initiative on getting rid of dark money, we would have had to create one. We would have had to have a group that had the rulemaking power that they have, that had the ability to hold hearings that they have, that has the enforcement powers that they have. So it was, I thought, a great combination. Christine has already used the marriage analogy, so it was a marriage of absolute necessity and convenience that the two got together, and I think are working very, very well.
I'd like to jump in on something that Terry said too that stood out, and Tom kind of mentioned this too. The central focal point here is the voter, and then what Terry mentioned too was it all centers around integrity. And you'll see that in every component of the elections process. And so whether we're talking about campaign finance, whether we're talking about logic and accuracy testing, whether we're talking about adjudication of ballots, or we're talking about, programming the election equipment, or we're talking about filing campaign finance reports, or verifying citizenship on voter registration forms. It all comes down to a transparent process, and our election laws and procedures are designed to promote that transparency in every component of the electoral process. And again, because when you have that transparency, it ultimately is going to lead to stronger confidence in the integrity of the election. And so I think that's really important about the role that Clean Elections plays. Because again, we talked about some of the components of the act, but it really comes down to being able to facilitate to that transparency and providing and instilling that confidence in voters, because we get questions from voters about everything from the process. We get questions about, when do these political signs have to be taken down? Or, where do I find out who donated to this candidate? Or how do I know that my early ballot was received and that my signature was verified? It's through the whole process that voters want to know and are interested about. And so I think that's one of the core components of the commission, that it really does center around that integrity and the transparency to get us to that integrity.
One thing that comes to mind with what you said and also what Terry said is in this sort of, we always talk, maybe as a longtime member of the media myself, I'm part of this, but, the blowing up of the division between the sides. And I wonder, yes, we talk about clean elections has been around in some capacity for more than 25 years. Have you found that the more people actually ask questions about clean elections or come to you, that is not only building transparency, but building trust as well? People say, okay, now I actually have more understanding of what it is clean elections does. Oh, this is even someone who may not have voted for it 25 years ago thinks, boy, I'm really glad Arizona has this.
I think that especially since 2016, we are seeing a major increase in voters wanting to know who is the entity that is trying to give them information or communication or any type of messaging. So they want to know, who is this organization? Who is Clean Elections? So that I understand, can I trust the information? And this is a lot of this is coming out of the issue of misinformation, knowing where to go to find accurate and official election information. Because we talk to voters a lot, and voters always say, okay, well, I go to Google. Okay, Google is a search engine, and you can pay to be at the top of that search engine with your results. And so you have to be able to it's a lot. There's so many messaging entities that are coming to voters. They're inundated with mailers, with TV commercials, with internet ads. Everybody is trying to get their message to voters during the election cycle. And so I would say since 2016, voters now more than ever want to know, okay, who is Clean Elections? Who are your 5-member commission? What is your goal? And how can I trust you? And I think, when we have the time to explain that to them, and we are able to build that trust, and I think they're grateful for that, because with Clean Elections, it's nonpartisan. So Christina, as a commissioner, she's part of a 5-member commission that is structured in a way so we have no more than 2 people of the same political affiliation. And all of the work that comes out of Clean Elections is completely nonpartisan, but also importantly, we're not trying to influence either. And so when voters are emailing us their questions, asking about how does this work, or, I have concerns, did my ballot count, things like that, they're more and more coming to us. And I think it's because they can trust that we don't have that, we don't have an agenda. So.
Christina, did you want to jump on that?
Yeah, well, I actually really appreciated just the nonpartisan actually works especially well with some of our local governments. And so that's been something that I think we talk about, for some people, they're just maybe being introduced to Clean Elections. For others, they've known about it for quite a while. And so I think as it kind of becomes just more and more prevalent, as again, people are sort of searching for that information and that source, that it's helpful that essentially there's this existing entity that's there, that has all the information, has these relationships with, throughout the state, obviously with the state itself, but all the counties who do the work, right, of administering elections. And of course, again, back down to the local level, right, our city town clerks, and other counties as well, like everything that goes into it, all that process, you can find all that information in one place. And I think that's a really useful tool. And again, as Gina mentioned, the fact that the way the commission is structured, it's not only party affiliation, but geographic as well, right? We're trying to make sure we're representative of the state. And again, as I mentioned before, I've just been really impressed with the, current commissioners that I've joined. They all have a very thoughtful approach to, the matters that are coming before it. And I think that can be sort of seen just through the work that the commission is doing.
Tom?
I think that one of the things that Tina mentioned that I think is important to, the counties, our counties do the hardest work in terms of the actually running the election, getting ballots out, getting ballots back, handling all the security associated with that, and the different checks and balances associated with that. And so a lot of their efforts around communicating with the public therefore focus on questions, some of which are good faith questions, some of which quite frankly are not good faith questions about how they go about doing that. What Clean Elections is able to do, because we don't have that role, is take a step back to talk to voters on a more basic level. In other words, there is a voter who very much wants to know precisely when ballots get moved from a vote center to central count and how that all works. There's a much bigger group of voters whose contact with the system is going to be much more limited. They want to know who's on their ballot. Who are these people? Especially in a universe where, as we all know, the media universe is consolidated and a little bit shrunk. That kind of information isn't quite as available as it once was. So, and then the other thing we fill in is a gap between where voters in real life are and where people perceive technology to put voters. So we distribute a voter education guide in English and Spanish to every voter household in the state with registered voter. In addition to that, in other languages through our website. For us, as Karen Osborne once said, that is our app, right? That is something that is going to be there for voters in rural and underserved communities, and also urban underserved communities, as well as folks who may not be underserved but just aren't savvy about the internet. That's a lot of people, and so so on the one hand, so what's happened over time is we have this dichotomy between these very sort of high level esoteric conversations about, hand count audits versus this sort of notion we should hand count every ballot. But, that's not where most voters are. Most voters are trying to find out, where's my polling place? Who are these people? What are these ballot measures? And where do I find that information in place that's going to tell me the straight truth?
Sorry, wanted to ask you to follow up on that. To some extent, I mean, you've done many, many things in your career, but was a part of your career, certainly when you were running for office in a partisan sense. With Phoenix mayor, you were not, but then when you attorney general, governor, et cetera, how does that jive with what you're thinking about in terms of what voters are really, the basic knowledge that many voters need to know? Because a lot of us are, we're political junkies. Everyone must know about this or that. When I think about clean elections and the involvement of the voters' right to know, it almost feels like there is that thing of getting people really where they are, as opposed to expecting them to have a graduate course in all of this already.
Well, the fact is that most voters don't have the graduate course that you're benefited by, and they are a little suspicious. And I think as time has gone on, they're more and more suspicious about a process that is complicated and to many people mysterious. And I think what I hear a lot of, and this goes back for many years, but it's accelerating now, is in this media frenzy, who is the honest broker? Who can I turn to that will give me straight information? And maybe too much. Tom often does that. It will overwhelm you, but it will be absolutely nonpartisan and it will be accurate. And that honest broker part is what I believe this commission has been able to play, and it is a reason for citizens to have confidence that the information they're getting, not from Google and not from the metaverse, is something that is accurate. They can rely on it, and it's honest. And that honest broker part is critical for restoring confidence in the election. You mentioned my dubious career, and a big part of it has been involved in election integrity, perhaps indirectly. But as Attorney General, I dealt with some challenges to elections, some of which we had to go back to the original ballots, and we had to verify that what the recorders at the county had done was in fact honest and accurate. I'm glad to say that we were able to confirm that. They were absolutely honest and accurate, and that is something that I was glad to do. And I think right now, that people want to have more and more of those challenges. Well, I don't believe you do the kind of effort that we went to when I was Attorney General every time. But when you do that, you help to validate the process. And we in Arizona ought to be proud that we've got an extraordinarily good election process. But don't take my word for it. Go to the Clean Elections Commission and get the facts.
Can I jump in, Steve? So I think that's an important note. There's the candidate perspective too. So we talk a lot about, the voter being central to all of this. One of the things that has just amazed me this year was a figure released by Ad Impact, and that Arizona is expected to have $821 million of media spending, political ad spending in the state of Arizona alone. That's, I think, the second highest in the nation, second or third. And that's a tremendous amount of money. And so running a campaign is expensive, regardless if you're, running traditional or through the clean funding program. It's expensive, and you're competing with messages. And so I think one of the great things too about that candidates have as a resource is connecting with the voters through the tools and the resources that the Clean Elections Act provides for. Whether that's our voter guide, and again, that's our debates. So Tom had mentioned this earlier. We produce a voter education guide that goes to every household with a registered voter. That's significant. It's going to every household, every mailbox in your district as a candidate. And so I'm grateful to say that a majority of candidates participate in submitting their information so that it can go out there. And we often hear from local candidates too, hey, can I get my information in there? And our website is a wonderful resource as well, because any candidate in the state of Arizona can go to azcleanelections.gov and they can create their own profile. So when voters are coming to our website, we're going to automatically show them all the candidates running in their district. So if you're a candidate running for city council, if you're running for school board, or if you're running for the state legislature, when that voter comes to our site, they're going to see your picture. If you have come to our website and created that profile, they're going to see your biography, your statement, they're going to see your links to your website, to your donations. And so that's a great opportunity to connect the candidates to the voters through a trusted resource that the voters have come to rely on, and it's at no cost to the candidates. And then there's our debates. We have seen so much more participation over the years. It's continuing to increase, that candidates are willing to step on the stage and talk to the voters directly, and voters submit their questions to us. And so it's this great really a conduit between the candidates and the voters at no cost to either entity to be them to hear directly from the candidates amidst all of this messaging coming at them. So I think the candidate perspective is important too, as they work through the clean elections tools and resources.
I'm really struck, obviously, by the $821 million number, but that also indicates that we know, not to shock anyone on this panel, but sometimes those ads are a little questionable in terms of whether they're completely honest or not. So that's another great way in which, Gina, as you said, clean elections can help clear some things up, looking at people's records and whatnot. I was just going to say, if you're watching us live, please send us questions. And we do have a question in a moment I'll get to later on in this conversation. If you're watching us live as well, we have about half an hour left in the conversation. Tell your friends, tell them to come on and watch with us. The link will be active for another half an hour. We'd love to hear you. We'd love to have you get involved in our conversation. We have touched on this a lot with all of you, but and I'm not sure, Gina, Christina, whichever one of you thinks would be better to discuss about this. But as we've talked about the importance of clean elections, but in the overall sort of scope of all the complicated election stuff, and in some cases not so complicated election things going on, where does clean elections fit in terms of both its importance, but also its important role as we get even closer? I'm thinking in terms of an election season, because that's where we are now. But I also think it's important to let people know that this isn't, clean elections doesn't just go dark when it isn't an election season. It's still active. It's even more vital right now. But is there a way to sort of put it in frame and put it in context as far as how important clean elections is to the overall election cycle, election scope, election atmosphere we see here in Arizona right now?
Well, I don't mind kind of answering part of this. So I would say, I think what people forget too is in the state constitution, it talks about the disclosure of contributions and expenditures for campaigns, right? So to me, I've always seen as clean elections as being a very important part of implementing that constitutional provision. Certainly the state and others, we all have other campaign finance, provisions. But I do believe that that's something that, again, was embedded in our constitution, and clean elections is that part of it. And so I do think that's very important. Again, it's not so much that, it's more about, we want the disclosure, right? We just want to know who's spending, who's trying to influence our votes. So not so much saying you can't do it. We just want to know how. And then again, following the structure that's been provided in the statute. And then my other piece was just going to talk about, obviously, the importance of the voter education, but I think that's probably better for Gina to respond to.
Sure. Yeah, I think, the commission is, we don't have any downtime. And honestly, if you ask any election official, some people still think, oh, what do you do when there's not an election? There's always an election. There's 4 elections every single year. And so that's where we get into the importance of local elections, which Christina has a lot of work in. Those local elections are critical because local government, I think, is where you feel the impact the most as just a citizen. So, voting in those local town council races are important because you want to have a say in your trash and water services, in your first responder services, in the local library, and how your local tax dollars are being used, in a 10-year plan, a 10-year general plan for your city. So I think those local elections are very important. And for every election that's happening in the state, we have that information. We work directly with those town clerks, with the counties, to get that information so voters can continue to have that one spot to come to find everything. And as far as the voter education plan goes too, this is something that the commission hears on an annual basis and adopts. So every year, the commission will enact an annual voter education plan that outlines the goals and objectives. And so I think it's important too to note that the commission is meeting on a regular basis. They meet every month. It's typically the third Thursday of the month. These meetings are open to the public. You can view them online. But the commission does its business in public. It's a public entity. And so, a great example of that right now is the Voters' Right to Know Act. So that was approved by voters in the last general election. And the commission has been having meetings in the public view to discuss how to implement the Voters' Right to Know Act and seek public input on it. So again, that goes to, it's not only transparency, but it's also involvement from the community, from the regulated community, from the voters. And so the commission is doing its business and involving the community that it serves to have a say in that. And again, whether it's the voter education plan, maybe it's, an entity saying, I'd like to see, more of this service in my community. We really need to learn more about, the ballot measures, or we really need to learn more about, how the candidates voted, or things like that. So the public always has an involvement in it. So the commission is meeting every month, and then we have our 4 elections throughout every single year. And so and then as to Christina's point too, that campaign finance disclosure, but there's constantly something happening in the election community.
Christina, let's go back to the local election aspect of that, because obviously the oxygen in the room is always sucked out by statewide or certainly presidential races. But there is I think without question, if we think about what happens on an everyday basis, it really is the people we elect in our municipalities. That could be school board, that could be mayor, could be council, whatever. But can you talk about the importance of voters being educated on those local races as well, and not just saying, oh my gosh, this is what I saw on CNN, Fox, or MSNBC, so therefore this is what I need to care about?
Sure, and thank you for the question. So, I am a municipal and elections attorney for local government. So, and so they're kind of close to my heart, right? All the cities and towns. And as Gina mentioned, local governments really are right closest to the people, because they are involving those issues that we deal with every day, right? And the mayors and the council members, I mean, they truly live in your community, right? You're going to more often bump into them than you would maybe a statewide officer. And so those local elections are important, and just kind of the way that they've been sort of framed over the years, right? If you even think about it in statute, like they're at the very bottom of the ballot, or this year when we're going to have probably multiple cards of ballots, they're going to be way at the back on the last page, which is unfortunate, because again, some of these issues that are being brought forward are so important, especially this year. We have a lot of franchise elections that are going on the ballot. And so that's your utilities, right? Do you want to continue your utility provider in your community? We have a lot of alternative expenditure limitations. And so that's, in the state constitution, it kind of limits what cities and towns can spend. And then every 4 years, they've got to go ask the voters, hey, can we spend what we take in, right? So it's not a tax increase, but it's more about, can we spend what we generate? So those are obviously very important, because if those aren't passed, then obviously there's consequences about, the budget itself and what can be spent in that community. We also just have obviously bond measures, right? There's a lot that's happening in terms of recreational facilities or expansion, development, anything like that. And even this year, I've noticed we've seen a lot of local initiative referendum. So, voters themselves are out there collecting signatures and getting measures on the ballot in their cities and towns. And so, I mean, there's so much happening at that local level that obviously we want the input, we want the voters to tell us what they want in their community. And so I've really appreciated that Clean Elections, has already started, years ago, to start incorporating cities and towns like election information, because as Gina mentioned, we have a few cities in the state that are off cycle, right? They don't align with the statewide election cycle. And then we also have special elections or recall elections. So things are always happening during those 4 consolidated election dates. And it's really important that especially in smaller communities where they don't have the resources as well, where they can, kind of rely on the Clean Elections website to be able to have their information out there. And then to see this expansion also of local candidates being able to use that site as well, to promote, themselves, and everyone gets that fair shot to do that. I just think it's been a really wonderful, thing for the local communities to sort of be included in that kind of conversation for voters.
Christina gave us a great segue to Terry on this. So Terry, I have a two-part for you. The local versus state, as far as the importance of making sure that all of us and voters pay attention to what's going on at the local level. But also, you've been involved, as we talked about, with the ballot measures, the grassroots effort on that. And obviously, that's been a part of Arizona's creation as a state with the Constitution. But can you give me a two-pronged answer on that? One, the importance of local, and then how impactful these ballot measures, grassroots level, can be in the state and have been.
Well, there's nothing more grassroots or local than standing on a street corner, getting signatures from your fellow citizens for a ballot proposition. So I really believe in it. My very first political activity was in the city of Phoenix, trying to change our charter to provide for a district system, and we're able to do that. And then most recently, the amazing effort that we tried 4 times to get on the ballot to have transparency and political contribution. Finally got it there and found out, not to our surprise, we always knew it was popular, but to have 72% of our fellow citizens say yes in this time of serious political division, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Greens, and Blues all said, yes, we want to know about transparency. And it is a wonderful, I think it is the escape hatch for citizens in Arizona, that if the legislature fails to do what the overwhelming majority of their fellow citizens want, and that was certainly true of voters' right to know, we have this escape hatch. We have the ability to go to the streets. It's hard, it's really hot, but it is a very important provision. And Arizona has taken the lead in the country in so many important areas: merit selection of judges, clean elections, I believe contribution transparency, even redistricting. The citizens have said, we can do a better job than what has been happening so far in the normal political process. And they have gone to an initiative and have helped to solve the problem. And I think that's a tremendous populist theme that we have throughout Arizona history. So yeah, we're a national leader because the citizens are aware and are out there promoting these very important issues. Now, there's some in reference to how long this ballot is, and I'll defer to Tom on analyzing some of the things that the legislature did to try to shortcut the process. It's one thing to go to 300,000 or 400,000 fellow citizens and get a statewide initiative on the ballot. It's a lot easier to go to a small majority or a simple majority of the legislature and get it put on directly. And we see a lot of that in this election. And I believe in the former. I'm not at all excited about the latter, because I think the legislature makes it look like they're doing something that's a citizen proposition, and it's not. So high points for being able to have in our Constitution citizens pass a petition, get it on the ballot, vote on it. Not so excited about having the legislature shortcut the process.
Tom, that's another great segue. But Gina, Terry, Christina, all of you are helping me move this along so much easier. So Tom, let's talk about that. There are only a couple of grassroots initiatives on the ballot this time, but we will see a lot of other measures, as Terry mentioned, legislature approved at this point. So can we talk about some of the ones that most interest you and how voters, again, can get the best information on?
Well, the ones that most interest me might not be the ones that most interest everybody else.
Well, all right.
About that. But there are two so far. There are 2 initiatives where folks went out and gathered signatures. One about does some changes to the election system, including an open primary, which means a primary for county and state level elections where all all candidates would be on one ballot, and then authorizes the legislature and the governor or the secretary of state to create some choices around how that would work in the general election, how many candidates advanced and how those votes would be tallied, among some other things. And then there's also the Arizona Abortion Access Act. So those are the two big citizen initiatives. There was a third one that ultimately didn't gather enough signatures to be on the ballot. And those are, at least the second one, the first one I mentioned, the Make Elections Fair, I think is still being litigated, although it is on the ballot as of today. And then there are something on the order of 10 different state legislative referenda. As Harry mentioned, the legislature can put on the ballot almost anything, and that's been a thing, especially in years for folks who have been around for a while, where there's a different party of governors of a different party than the legislature. The sort of peaks of this have happened when there's divided government, and so those range everything from changes to how employers pay tipped workers to changes to the judicial retention election system that would allow for judges, instead of being retained every 4 or 6 years, they would serve until an age subject to discipline by the Judicial Discipline Commission. There are a couple of others that I think are particularly interesting. There's a competing measure with the Make Elections Fair. And then there is another one to require folks who do go out and get initiative signatures to get them from districts around the state. So that is going to would really change significantly the way in which an organization like Terry's put together at a grassroots level would be able to operate. You would have to, because the population of those districts is different, and there are some so that'll be a significant change. Lastly, I think one that is particularly interesting is that there is one that would change the way in which administrative rules are made. And this is the one that interests me. It would say that if you pass an administrative rule that costs more than $500,000 over 5 years to implement, the legislature would have to ratify that rule. So for the kind of folks who are tuned into this, that's got to be the number one. The other initiatives and referendums are for normal folks, but that's the one for the real nerds. But it does create this complicated issue. Maricopa County's already been since May saying, look, this is going to mean a 2-card, as they say, or 2-page ballot. That's 1 page front and back and another page front and back. That raises issues with making sure folks who vote on election day, when they're putting that through the machine, you can't put, you're going to have to put them in one at a time, because if you're putting in 2, that could create some issues. It also means that this issue we all know about, and if you don't know about it, you can certainly look it up on our website. The need to get your early ballot back as soon as possible becomes even more important. Everybody wants to get the results back quickly. Everybody, and the most important driver of that is when a person who, the 90% of folks who got their voted by mail in the primary, those folks getting those ballots back as early as possible is what allows our county officials to be able to deliver as many results at 8 p.m. on election day, and within that first 24 hours, which is the target that Maricopa County has set up to want to get as much of the information out to voters as possible. Voters have a key role in that, which is getting those early ballots back.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's that's a lot of information. It's great information, but between what Tom and Christina have said, between talking about these ballot measures and franchises and utilities and alternative expenditure limitations and primaries, that is a lot of information for a voter to vote on their ballot. And how do you prepare for that, right? It's okay. So I'm just, for the average voter, it sounds exhausting. I would imagine, especially if you're not an election nerd, that we kind of all talk and say that we are. And so, I think for voters, one, it's never too early to start researching. But you don't have to vote everything on your ballot, but we want you to, right? There's a lot of important choices. And it doesn't matter if the office is placed at the very top or at the very bottom on the back of a 2-card ballot. Every election is important and matters. And so it does take time to be able to research all of those issues. And so for all of those measures, you're going to get something directly in your mailbox from whether it's your local jurisdiction, if it's your city or town that is sending you a publicity pamphlet that has all of those measures in it, or if it's coming from the Secretary of State's office that has all of those statewide ballot measures in there, including arguments for and against, or if it's the Clean Elections Voter Education Guide with the candidate information, you will get things in your mailbox. And all you have to do is look for that official election mail logo to know that it is official, accurate information that's coming to you. But those will help you prepare. And so as Tom mentioned with early voting starts 27 days before the election. So for our upcoming November 5th general election, ballots are going to start to go out on October 9th. So you're going to get your ballot in the mail. And I think it's important to know too, in this last primary election, about 90-something% of voters chose to vote by early ballot, at least here in Maricopa County. And so we know that voters enjoy that option, and it's a great option because you can get your ballot, you can research, at your kitchen table, you can vote with your family members, and as Tom said, importantly, try to get that ballot returned as soon as possible. But ultimately, my point here is that it's a lot to be an informed voter. And so we recognize that. And so again, going back to the Clean Elections website, we're going to direct you to where all of that information can be found. Again, whether it's that, local town measure with, again, that franchise election, what does that language look like? What is the impact of a yes or no vote? But also, and I'm really excited about this too, Steve, is we have 3 issues debates that we're going to be sponsoring. So for primaries, abortion, and immigration, we are working with our partners at the Arizona Media Association to produce these debates on these 3 statewide issues that will hopefully reach all households across the state, so you can learn more about it, because I know sometimes it's hard to understand the legalese when you're reading through those documents, and that's a lot to read through. So stay tuned. Those are going to be hopefully coming to your TV or to your phone or your YouTube, and we'll have great conversations so that you can see, the proponents and the opponents talk about those measures and what they believe would happen if you vote yes or no for them.
Actually, we have a couple of viewer questions to get to in a minute. I want to just personalize things a bit. Let me start with you. I want to have all of you answer this. You mentioned, how many times we've mentioned election nerds or election junkies or whatever. So, Gina, when you get your ballot, even though you have an extra bit of knowledge, are you someone who sits at the kitchen table and does it right away? Are you someone who lets it linger a little bit? Just without getting into your responsibility with clean elections, I'm just curious how you approach it.
Okay. Everybody is going to hate me for this answer that you are calling me out. And I'm going to be honest, I am a late early. And so I go against everything Tom just said, and I drop off and the counties are probably like, really, but I drop off my ballot typically on election day for the most part. In the primary, I got it in a week before. I was proud of myself. But the reason why is because as an election official, what happens is my family is coming to me throughout the whole voting process, and they're like, hey, who do I vote for? They want to talk about, what did you think about this? What did you, this? Some of them even say, can I just see your ballot and copy it? No, we'll talk about it, and I'll give you information so you can make your own choices. But usually with that process means I'm waiting for everybody in my household to complete their ballot, and then I return them all together because as the election person, I get automatically designated for that. So my preference personally is to mail it back because its postage is prepaid. I can walk the few steps to my mailbox and I don't have to worry about it. And the wonderful thing about Arizona is that we have tracking. So I can get a text message or an email saying, hey, your ballot was delivered. Hey, we verified your signature. Your ballot is being tabulated. I get confirmations through that whole process. So I have confidence that my ballot is counted. But unfortunately, just because I am often helping, other family members, I usually drop it off on election day. But the good part about that too is I will say when I drop it off on election day, I'm bringing my kids with me. We're going into the polls and they get the I voted sticker, even though you can get them, through your ballot at home too. But I love to take my kids there and show them the process. So I'm sorry I'm late early.
That was an honest answer, which started off rough, but then you ended it nicely. So that was terrific. Terry, what about you?
Thanks for that.
Terry, what do you do?
I'm afraid I'm in Gina's camp, partly because I put off the difficult elections, the ones where I have a very serious choice to make, and I also have to provide advice to friends and neighbors. So that takes some of the time that I should be spending getting it done and getting it mailed in. My wife is an early adapter; she gets it in, I think, the next day, and so she balances out my tardiness, I hope. But there's an inferential. I just have to mention it because unfortunately, one of the tragedies or one of the consequences of having 90% of the voters do it by mail is a program that we used to have in Arizona called Kids Voting, which I thought was an absolutely spectacular success, largely because in the few statewide elections that I was in and lost, I won in kids voting. So I've always been a big proponent of that, but it was take your child with you to the polling place so that they'll get in the habit of casting a ballot. Now it's a little more difficult, but what Gina said is critical. You need to involve the family. You need to sit down and discuss what's on the ballot and make sure the kids are involved.
Great. Christina, what about you? How do you go about voting?
So I vote early, and I actually usually get it in within the week. So because usually the ballots are sent out like that, again, like kind of like on a Thursday. So if I get it before the weekend, I'll use that first weekend. If not, I'll just take a few days because because being an election geek, I have sort of followed a lot already. So I already kind of have my mind made up. And then I tend to drop it off now. I mean, I could put it in the mail, have enough time, but it's just an extra certainty for me to know that I put it in the drop box.
Great. Okay. And Tom?
I drop it off at the McTech Dropbox, usually the Thursday or Friday before election day.
Okay. Let's go to a couple of the questions we have from our viewers. Is there a reason that the down ballot offices, candidate statements, et cetera, can't be put first in the election pamphlet rather than last, so people will pay more attention to those offices and reduce a drop off after the most highly publicized races? Gina, is that a question you can answer?
Sure. So I know it says pamphlet specifically, but I'm going to actually relate that back to the ballot. So ballot order is determined by statute. So it says specifically which races go in which order, and then even to some extent with ballot rotation and party, it can even go down to, depending on the county, which gubernatorial candidate won that particular county in their party. So there's a specific structure outlined in state statute that determines the ballot order for all of those candidates, and that can't be changed without a legislative action. But in regards to the voter guide that goes out, we organize it in the same structure just so it matches your ballot when you're going down. So that's the reason why for that.
Steve, I love this suggestion, though. It would mean that the Central Arizona Water Conservation District board, for which I'm running, would be first because we are last, and the Senate would be last, and everybody would be encouraged to pay attention to the lower ballot items. I know the law is different and we can't change that, but boy, it's a great idea. Maybe you could just start reading your ballot backwards.
This webinar is now going to get alarms ringing at the RNC and DNC headquarters.
No, it would be interesting just, and I'm saying this as someone who's not an election official, if there was sort of a lottery each election cycle to see, all right, which order do we go in this time around? It's much more complicated for folks like you, but it might be interesting for the public. I think we know the answer to this one, but I'm going to throw it out because the person took the time to send it in. Does Clean Elections have any responsibility in the county certification process if that county refuses to certify a county's election, or is that the Attorney General's responsibility?
So, I mean, the answer to that question is it's not Clean Elections' responsibility. What we have, I will say though, that the commission has taken the commissioners themselves have taken an active role in monitoring that. Certainly in 2020 and 2022, the commission, for example, this was a commissioner-initiated idea to place an ad in the, I think it was the Cap Times, thanking our county election officials and county board of supervisors for their diligence in ensuring that they did their duty and both counted and in both administrating and certifying those elections. Principally, those actions, county, or I should say certified election officers have to sign a form that says they're going to abide by the laws of the state when to get their certification. And obviously, we know that there are ongoing litigation by the Attorney General's office to, at a minimum, say to those folks who have in the past maybe attempted to shirk that duty, that that's not lawful. So, I think that it's something, again, it's not a formal role, but the clean elections commissioners, each one of them, who are folks who are, who represent citizens around the state, are very interested in ensuring from their point of view, sitting as commissioners, that the county officials and county board of supervisors that are responsible for this, understand that the commission knows that they're where the rubber meets the road, and that it's a tough job, and that they want to make sure that the public knows that our agency supports them in that mission.
And there is a voter education component too, so that we have a role in, and so there's an entire section on our website that talks about the post-election day activities that the counties have to undergo before they can certify those results. So we do educate the public about, okay, it's after election night, you're going through audits, you're going through post logic and accuracy testing, you're going through provisional processing. So we do explain all of those steps from an educational component about what happens prior to the county board of supervisors being able to certify their election results.
One thing that we do, one thing that we do that I think is really, because we're voter centered, our website, when you go to a county website, they got a lot of stuff they got to do, including administering elections. Our banner on our website says your vote is safe. So I think that is about as simple and boils it down what our perspective is on that.
And that's great. Gina, quickly, what date does the voter's guide get mailed? Would you happen to know that?
About September 17th, we will start sending them to the mailboxes. So they will arrive in households before the start of early voting. So October 7th is the voter registration deadline. October 9th is when early ballots go out. You will have your voter guide in your mail before then.
Terrific. And before we get to a point of wrapping up, I want to have all of you talk a little bit about, fairly briefly, I think based on this conversation, people should feel some security that Clean Elections has information, that our elections are secure. But for those people who are, let's say, not questioning the elections, but are a little bit like, well, why can't they be perfect? Why can't they be perfect? Can we talk a little bit about why people should have confidence in this upcoming general election? I mean, I suppose I'm asking for a relative soundbite, but because we're all people who believe that the election system is, sure, might have little flaws here and there, but we all believe in it very strongly. Why should everyone in the state believe in the system strongly, even if it does have little flaws here and there? Terry, would you want to start with that?
Sure. I think our confidence is based on how transparent the process is. And Clean Elections provides this amazing degree of transparency. There was a question we didn't get to that says, well, where are these disclosures made? And the answer is not Clean Elections, but Secretary of State. But between the two, voters have the opportunity to watch the contribution process and make sure that that's above board, and that they know who's behind the candidates, and that they have a chance to be involved, maybe as an election official at the polling place, maybe just as an active citizen, in watching to make sure that they're satisfied that our election system is safe, secure, and above board. I believe it is, from years of experience, both in investigating our elections and also being a part of them. Win some, lose some, but you respect the result. And Arizona certainly is worthy of that medal. We do a great job.
Christina, could I go to you next on that?
Sure. I mean, I would say that there's a lot of safeguards in place, right, that I think also the voters don't know. And so we have a lot of checks and balances, we have reports, we have things like that to kind of help as people are at the polls. The poll workers are volunteers, right, that are trained. They're giving a lot of time to essentially, be to participate in this process. And I think, as Gina mentioned, sometimes it's put your ballot in, and then it's like, what's next? And it's not just a trust me, right? Instead, we've actually described the process. This is what happens next, and this is what needs to happen in order for things to sort of go through completion to actually certify at the canvas.
And before Gina wraps us up, Tom, what are your thoughts on that?
Tom is muted.
I may have to move on to the Gina.
We can hear you now.
Sorry, can you go? I lost the question then.
No, it was just in terms of why those who are watching right now, whether they're watching us live or they watch us later, why they should have confidence in our elections.
Well, look, I mean, I think we've had dozens of lawsuits filed over the last couple of years, with some with more merit, many with no merit at all. But the fact is that you know, there is just no evidence out there. But whatever the issue is, you know, one of the things that people talk about this weekend because of a Supreme Court decision on a Ninth Circuit stay is about, you know, we have this additional documentary proof of citizenship requirement in Arizona. We've had it on the books for 20 years. Was pre-cleared by the U.S. Department of Justice when it was first passed in 2004. And the reality is that there are no non-citizens voting in Arizona, no detectable number. You couldn't find the number if you wanted to. No one is registering. So while the legislature may have the right to create this additional thing, the evidence is not there. And I think that that's the thing that every person in elections is respectful enough of individuals who contact us to say, okay, tell me what the information you're relying on is, and let's talk about it. But be able to respond in a way that says, look, there is evidence and there's not evidence of this. And that's, you know, it's proved at the end of the day. And I think that if we can't agree that there's evidence, that evidence is going to be the decision-making thing for anything, then we really have lost something much bigger than just the conversation around the logistics of elections.
Gina, as we close, remind people of Clean Elections resources where they can find out more.
Sure, absolutely. So again, regardless of if you're interested in information on candidates or, you need the logistics of how to get your ballot, or you're interested in debates, or again, election security and integrity, all of that information is available at azcleanelections.gov. I know there was a question about ballot tracking too. We have the links there for you. So throughout this election process, if you visit that website, you really are going to find everything that you need to cast your ballot confidently. And again, that's tuning into our debates. It's looking at the resources we send you directly to your mailbox, but everything you need, azcleanelections.gov, and you'll find your answers there.
This has been the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop. Protect your vote, learn, engage, and act. Thanks so much to all of you for watching. Thanks very much to Tom Collins, Gina Roberts, Christina Estes-Werther, and Terry Goddard. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us today. I'm Steve Goldstein. Take care.